Welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. Really lovely to see. It's lovely to flick across those who've got their videos on to see you. Haven't seen many of you for a while. Delighted that we've got Stuart Wilson from PwC joining us. He's lead partner for their Scottish consulting business. And he's going to talk us through the PwC report, Good Growth for Cities, which we found really interesting to look at. I don't want to kind of steal his thunder, but really interesting that Edinburgh emerges as the least impacted city in the UK by COVID. Of the 42 cities that are in the index, and that's largely due to kind of the sectoral mix and the low case rates. The flip side of it that I picked up from the exec summary is that it's likely we're going to have a longer, slower recovery. So really interesting to look at, how the report was compiled, who you spoke to, what were the questions that were asked. But looking at it, it's really putting aside GDP as a measurement of economic growth and really looking at the other broader factors around well-being, jobs, distribution of income. I feel I'm going into all your territory, Stuart, so I'll stop there. But before I hand over to Stuart, I thought it'd be interesting to give some stats on Edinburgh. I usually kind of love to throw some numbers at people, which I find fascinating. And I guess what's really interesting about your report, Stuart, you talk about that kind of sectoral mix, and the resilience of Edinburgh as a result of that. But I think what it does do is mask the polarization of the sectors in the city. You've got great success in financial services and tech and bioscience, some of our really strong sectors. But at the other end of the spectrum, we've got hospitality and tourism that's, absolutely broken. And the impact of there has been devastating for the city. And I suppose that's what probably will drive that slow recovery, because most people are suggesting maybe 2024 before we start getting those international visitors back to the city. But Joe, my director of policy, sent me some really interesting stats yesterday, which I thought I'd share in terms of those kind of visitor numbers. And in 2019, international visitors to Scotland were 3.5 million. And 2.3 million of those visited Edinburgh. So 66% of the international visitors to Scotland came to Edinburgh. I think Glasgow was significantly behind with only 770,000 visitors, Aberdeen 160, and Dundee 70,000. And the rest of Scotland only having 5% of the total of those international visitors. I thought that was really interesting, but also, indicative of the impact that we're feeling with that loss of numbers. Domestic visitors to Scotland were 13.8 million. So that, again, 20% of visitors to Scotland domestically, visitors to Edinburgh were domestic. So roughly the same number, but half the spend. So in kind of my rough calculations, to be able to get back to that economic benefit, we're going to have to attract 3 times the number of domestic visitors to Edinburgh to sort of get that economic recovery going. And that is without a marketing Edinburgh or a sort of a destination management function for the city. So, we've got a job to do to get that back up and running. And I guess that alongside, that has produced a 90% reduction in footfall in the city centre. So the double whammy of that loss of visitors plus people not going into the offices, and we're not sure when that will recover, if at all, in the foreseeable future. So there's real strain on the city centre, and there was an update from Roddy, the Chief Executive of Essential Edinburgh, just last week, saying there are 50 vacant units along George Street, Rose Street and Princes Street, and that's up from 4 pre-pandemic. So we are a city centre that has got its challenges, and I guess it's changing, like everyday life. It will change. We're lucky we've got the St. James Quarter opening in June, and that's going to revolutionise the retail and leisure in the city, providing that experiential destination right in the city centre. We've got the George Street transformation set to create a European boulevard for George Street. No traffic at all, no buses, no taxis. I think it's sort of walking and cycling and outdoor cafes. Looks wonderful in the pictures, but we'll see what it looks like in a Dreek Edinburgh winter. I always think that we'd like to compare ourselves to European cities, but the weather doesn't quite match up. And of course, Princes Street is changing. We've seen a lot of the retail units disappear. Planning consent has changed now from retail only to more leisure and hotels. And the city planners are looking at the future of Princes Street, a holistic development of it, and the Waverley Valley. So that kind of space that joins the old town to the new town. So I guess, it's a city that's constantly moving forward. No room for complacency. It's my hobby horse. I do have a worry about the city centre and how businesses will survive the coming years with that lack of footfall, and how they sort of sustain a model that's workable. Be interesting to see if you've got any thoughts on that, Stuart. So really, that's me setting the scene. But I think as a city, we do need to lead into how we, as they talk about, recover forward, bounce back, or bounce forward with good growth, and how we tackle the inequalities and disadvantages that have been revealed during the pandemic. So good growth for cities that Stuart's going to talk to us about is part of PwC's Future Government programme, exploring how government and businesses can work together to address inequality and deliver a fair recovery. And I think that's something very much at the front of our minds as well. I think Stuart's going to talk for about 15 to 20 minutes or 15 minutes, but he said at the beginning he's really keen to have a discussion and to capture some views. So please either put your hand up or just wave, and we'll see if we can bring you in rather than just read questions. And then following Stuart, we've got Elin Williamson, who is Senior Manager for Business Growth and Inclusion at the City of Edinburgh Council, and she's going to give us an update on what's happening in the city in terms of recovery. So that's my quick preamble. Can I hand over to you now, Stuart?
Yeah, of course, Liz, and hopefully you and everyone can hear me okay. So yeah, I mean, firstly, thank you very much for having me along this morning. I'm coming from the West Coast. I'm based in Glasgow, but spent many happy years in Edinburgh as a student. So I'm with family over in the city. It's a place very close to my heart. Just by way of introduction, so as Liz said, I'm a partner in PwC. I sit within our consulting practice and lead our public sector and consulting business up here in Scotland. I'm actually a technology partner by trade, so most of the day job for me is focused on supporting organisations, largely in the public sector, to transform or embrace sort of new technologies to help them sort of drive growth or cost reduction or general improvement. So that's what I do. By way of the next sort of 10 to 15 minutes, and as Liz said, I would love to leave some time, sort of 5 to 10 minutes at the end, to have a broader discussion, because a lot of this agenda, there is no set answer that everyone will appreciate, and we're very keen to hear the views across cities and regions, because one of the big themes that comes out of good growth is that there's quite a broad range of outcomes and resolutions as we recover from the pandemic, spread across different regions. So there is no one set answer for the UK. It will vary obviously widely by region. So I'm going to cover 4 things. I'll give you all a very brief introduction to good growth for cities, just to provide a bit of context and explain what it is. I'll then attempt to headline the sort of key findings, and I'll drill down to some specifics on Edinburgh and Scotland from the report. And then thirdly, and I think really important for us all, is what this means in terms of recovery and what some of our considerations should be, certainly across the UK. But I'd really like to explore what those mean from an Edinburgh context. And then finally, as I said at the outset, if we could leave some time for discussion on those themes, and in particular the role that business will play in supporting each of the sort of key recovery themes. So hopefully that's okay for everyone. And Liz, please jump in if there's any hands or anyone wants to break the conversation or ask questions. So first and foremost, what is good growth? Good growth for cities, or the Good Growth for Cities Index is a measurement that looks at performance of cities and regions across the UK. We've been running it with the think tank Demos since 2012. And I think, as sort of Liz mentioned at the outset, the key feature of our Good Growth for Cities annual study is it looks beyond GDP as a measure. And I think that's really important, particularly around the whole levelling up agenda. GDP alone is not a sufficient measure when we're trying to assess the economic health and well-being of our regional economies. So what good growth does is it takes a basket of additional measures of economic well-being, which cover areas such as jobs, income, health, skills, transport, environment, housing, work-life balance, etc., to provide an overall city index score. And obviously, hopefully, everyone has had a chance to see the report. But if not, we can certainly share that after the discussion today. Obviously, this year there's been a sharp focus on obviously the impact of the pandemic and what that means for the recovery prospects of the UK and each individual region. And that's what I'm going to move on to now. So, key findings. Given the time, I'm going to try and distill this down to sort of 3 or 4 kind of key themes around what we have identified within the data coming back. And I think, as Liz, the first of those, as Liz pointed out, is that the cities that have traditionally performed well in our Good Growth report are well positioned to withstand the worst impacts of the pandemic. And that there is a sort of theme there. And as we mentioned, Edinburgh actually is the least severely impacted city within the UK, with a GVA of negative 9.1%. That's actually the sort of top of the table, if you like, within the report. In terms of the Edinburgh in the context of the wider Scottish cities for the Good Growth Index, we have 2 cities in Scotland in the top 10. Edinburgh is 5th and Aberdeen is 7th. Actually, I think Edinburgh has jumped Aberdeen this year. Glasgow is in the middle of the pack, around 24 out of 42. As Liz sort of indicated, why has Edinburgh been least severely impacted than other cities? And there's a kind of couple of key factors which are quite consistent around the sort of the higher performing cities. One obviously is the sector mix of Edinburgh, which obviously, unlike other cities that have a very strong dependency on those sectors hardest hit, i.e. entertainment, hospitality, wholesale, etc., Edinburgh's had a bit more shielding to that, obviously with its diverse sector mix. Obviously, the lower infection rate in Edinburgh has had an impact, and the health index in Edinburgh is higher than it performs better than other areas. But certainly that sector mix being a key feature of Edinburgh's resilience. The second sort of key theme is the cities that were hardest hit are projected this year to have the strongest bounce back. And actually speaking to Liverpool City Council just the other week, areas like Liverpool, Doncaster, Southend, even Glasgow thinks GVA in 21 is higher than Edinburgh. I mean, the real factor of that is, as I mentioned, is these cities are coming from, I mean, the sort of mathematical element are coming from further back. And obviously, a lot of those regions have a very high dependency on the sectors that have been hardest impacted by the pandemic. So obviously, as lockdown restrictions ease, and industries such as entertainment, leisure, hospitality start to reopen, obviously that will have a greater bounce back effect in those particular areas. Third theme, I think frightfully important for us all, is when we look at the sort of health scores and the skills of young people. These measures had been declining before the pandemic, and we had started to see a closing of the gap between the sort of the highest performing cities and those at the bottom. What we're starting to see is that gap widening, and I think never more so the trends of the pandemic are really amplifying the challenges for recovery and leveling up, as we see a sort of gulf opening between those most socially impacted and economically impacted by the pandemic. So a theme we will explore certainly is the agenda around skills. One area very close to my heart, and something we've been talking a lot about here at PwC, is young people, and the younger generation now looking to enter the labour market in very turbulent times. I think that's going to be a real challenge for us. So skills and youth unemployment are going to be key issues, I think, for us in Edinburgh and Scotland and the UK. An interesting one here, because there's been a slight advance on this since our report was issued. I was talking to our economist that leads the report just the other day, and actually when you look at the public's views and what matters most, which is one of the sort of key areas we look at through the report, health and jobs and income obviously were sort of the key areas that were most important to the public, followed by areas such as housing and skills. I think the interesting thing here is there's been a slight advancement in that. We do some follow-up surveys, and as you'd probably expect, and not surprisingly, a feature that's now rising up in the level of importance to the public is the development and enhancement of neighbourhoods and their local economies and regions. And Liz, you mentioned you mentioned Princes Street and the city centre. Again, that's another sort of key area, not just at a city level, but actually at a local level as well, those sort of regional local hubs. And I think there's a key consideration here about how we support that agenda coming out of the pandemic. So we'll touch on that in terms of some of the recovery themes. So those were the sort of at a very high level, those are the sort of key themes, our key findings, if you like, from the report. In terms of sort of Scotland as a whole and Edinburgh, we typically score above average in areas such as skills, transport and jobs, with the exception of Glasgow, but certainly Edinburgh above average in skills, transports and jobs. In Scotland, less well on areas such as health and business owner occupation. So the sort of the positive and negative in terms of some of the key themes in the report. So I think moving forward, and hopefully I'm all right with time, Liz, I haven't been checking when we started, but I think we're okay. Looking into, so what are the sort of key strategies for local recovery, and a couple of key initial points here. I think the first bit that within our report is there is absolutely, I got asked this the other day, a conversation I was having with a client, is there is no one approach or no one strategy. There certainly are some key processes that can be adhered to, but there is no one approach that will uniformly support every region in the UK. So I think taking a very place-based approach to recovery is going to be absolutely key for Edinburgh and our UK cities. However, there are, I would say, sort of five key sort of measures that we should be looking at and considering as part of the recovery agenda. I'll just step through those very briefly and then summarize and hopefully open up to discussion. So the first one, and it was touched on at the outset, is fairness. I think never more has the pandemic shone a real light on the inequalities in our society, and part of our recovery plans will be focusing on how we create fair and inclusive places for people, which are focused on the most vulnerable communities and those in need. And as I mentioned, one particular component of the economy will be our younger workers entering what's going to be a very difficult labour market. So some real considerations for us there around fairness. The second area is around productivity and how both government, UK, Scottish government, local government and business work together to create areas where businesses can really thrive. Where we've got real commercial culture, we support entrepreneurship, investment, innovation, and again a real focus on skills and creating the right infrastructure connectivity to support business in a digital age. Sustainability, obviously the key theme. It's a key theme for all of us at the moment. Very big agenda, certainly within PwC, but I know all our clients, it's up there, and really in terms of recovery, how we create sustainable places for our communities to live in, where we embed environmental sustainability, clean air, net zero. All those elements have to be absolutely at the heart of our recovery plans. In terms of the local agenda, and I talk about this from a sort of local perspective, but a lot of the components within here are relevant to the city centres, and the challenge that as someone that lives in Glasgow and can see the effects and the scarring that's happening in Glasgow city centre, and I'm sure in Princes Street and other city centres, is how we reinvigorate those areas and how we create kind of really livable, vibrant communities, places to visit and places to live. And I think there's some interesting themes here, and we cannot now just rely on the sort of I think retail reopening and that high street going back to what it was before. I think we have to think differently about what will attract people back into our cities and back into our high streets. Again, when we sort of talked about that, what matters to people around developing an enhancement of neighbourhoods, there was certainly a sort of an idea of how we create focal points or something that a particular area, city or location can be proud of, and the people within that area will gravitate towards and come visit and support the future growth of that particular area. So a real need to focus on that livability agenda. And then finally, resilience and supporting and protecting all our regions and areas for future shocks. So it's really putting the public at the heart of that recovery, and taking a really, really broad-based approach to the economic and social well-being within our areas. And I think that's really, really it's a really, really important theme that we'll maybe touch on in the discussion. So those kind of five key themes and measures are what we believe are sort of common dynamics, if you like, to supporting the recovery post the pandemic. Just in terms of kind of a couple of points to summarize all of that. I did touch on it in terms of the report and in terms of some of those sort of key themes, but there's a massive role for all actors now to contribute to our recovery, both in Edinburgh and in the wider UK. One of the key measures, which is frightfully important to the public when we speak to them, is trust. And it's very interesting to see the role that business has played in the recovery, and how supportive business has been in terms of helping and supporting the public through the pandemic. And business, I think, has played a crucial role, and I think gained a lot in terms of trust across the public. So I think business is one actor that had a massive part to play, particularly when we look at the skills agenda and the challenge we're going to have with the younger workforce getting back into the coming into the labour market. So business had a key role to play, and it's the interaction between business and government and the roles that both have to play and support one another in terms of the recovery is going to be absolutely key. We will hear more and more around the levelling up agenda in coming months, but I would just sort of pose, I think one sort of kind of key question is, I think when we talk about levelling up, it's not necessarily, the question shouldn't be what to level up. It's really, what do people want? What does levelling up mean within our own regions? And I think, for example, traditionally, I think governments have tended to see the sort of north-south divide as something that can be solved by allocating infrastructure funding, projects or programmes to the north. But it's going to be way more complicated than that. We're going to need to think about what we're doing, as I've said, in relation to skills, access to employment, digital connectivity, the experience people have of living in different parts of the country. And these are things that really matter to people. So the levelling up agenda is far beyond what I think traditionally we have thought it meant. And then just one final thought, and we touched on, is I think one area where I take some positivity about what we've seen over the last year now is the resilience and the way that we have embraced as a city, as a country, we've embraced a shift to digital working. And the ability that we've all shown, all the clients we work with across every industry sector has adapted and adopted to new sort of collaboration platforms, ability to innovate how we work. And I think that shows what we can do. And it does give me, and it gives certainly many of my colleagues in PwC real hope about how we will evolve and embrace new digital opportunities post-COVID. Liz, I'll stop there. I'm conscious that there's an awful lot of material in good growth. I've tried to veer away from bombarding with statistics, but hopefully that gives everyone some of the themes that were coming out of the report and some of the key indicators around how we will face the recovery, both in Edinburgh and across the UK. And I'd really welcome a discussion and to understand from other industries and other sectors reflections on some of those points.
Thanks, Stuart. I think that was a really good canter through a report, a really interesting report, actually. While everybody's having to think about their contribution, I'll maybe kick off. You talk about the role of business, I think is absolutely critical. And when you look in the report, the top two, when you speak to the public, the top two priorities are having a secure job and adequate income levels. So those jobs will be provided by business, well, unless it's kind of public sector. So businesses need to survive, they need to scale, they need to create jobs, we need to invest in technology, we need to think about upskilling. So there's a number of interventions that government could put in place to support that investment in skilling and digital uptake. I know that the Chancellor gave us that kind of super relief for investment, so that hopefully is encouragement to make investment. But there is this move, and I'm seeing it even with UK government, this move away from an industrial strategy to this levelling up strategy. And in Scotland, it's the inclusion, fair work, net zero carbon agenda, which we're all behind. But do you think we're lacking sitting alongside that inclusion agenda, a real strong industrial strategy that does look at productivity and opening up international markets and upskilling and use of data so that we are more competitive and can grow faster?
It's a really good question, Liz, and it was actually one that we discussed the other day. I mean, you've got to be very careful from this. The kind of crude answer is I do think we're lacking a bit of strategy in that area. Yes, I do, and I think it's interesting as well when you look at the investment government is making in the what was announced obviously in the budget in terms of the additional support given in grants and loans to the economic recovery. I think everyone would agree that's money well spent, but I think the big question is what is the return we're getting for that? And there's some interesting economic indicators that would suggest that the actual the gross value added return that we're getting for that investment isn't what it should be. So I absolutely agree. I think it's an area that we're lacking a bit of direction. Interestingly, it's slight digressing, but and this is probably hot off the press, and I'm sure our marketing people will kick me for it. But in about a week's time, I think it is, we're also launching the results of our annual CEO survey, which I'm sure many of those on the call will find interesting. And just a couple of snippets from that, which I think are quite interesting, is I think what was the statistic? I think that 77% of UK chief executives are going to invest in digital transformation this year. So I mean, it's always been an area of kind of key importance across business, but you know, never more so in terms of what we're finding from that result. Interestingly as well, and I say I'm digressing slightly here. The number one worry for business in the UK, which has moved up from the number 4 spot, is going to be cybercrime. And the reason I mentioned that is these are just sort of two key areas that sit within a much broader sort of digital technology-based strategy that's going to help drive business growth, support employment, support skills in a sort of post-COVID agenda. So I would really like to see a real coherent plan and actually the role that business can play in supporting that plan. So hopefully, Liz, probably a bit bumped about there, but hopefully that sort of addresses some of the points you raised.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm not seeing any hand. Oh, I do. I am seeing a hand. Kevin Havelock, do you want to come in?
Yes, Liz, just I suppose, Stuart, I suppose a question, a couple of reflections. So that was a really great summary, and the report was great. I just love the way it kind of compares us with other cities, some of the other places that I see Edinburgh compete against, places like Bristol and the like. It was great to see everybody represented there. But I think the bit I would like to pick up on is your point about the local agenda. And what conclusions do you think we can draw about the regions that are around cities? And are you seeing evidence of migration from the city housing market, job market, businesses out into, you know, places maybe Mid Lothian, East Lothian, into Fife that kind of spin out of Edinburgh? And is that a trend that you think's here to stay, or is it just a short-term reaction to the pandemic?
It's a really good question, Kevin. I think I can certainly answer, and I'm sure we've all seen the data, I can certainly answer that from a London perspective. I mean, in quite staggering numbers, the answer to that is yes. That the migration from London is staggering. I think also when you put on top of that the reduction in terms of business influx that city gets on a weekly basis, and Edinburgh as well, actually, from all the organisations that attract a sort of weekly business inflow, it's having a massive impact. I also think, I'm not answering your question, I'll come back to it. I also think from a UK government perspective, that puts a real greater challenge on the levelling up agenda, but at the same time our sort of our economy in London is suffering a sort of disproportionate impact from losing a large number of its workforce out into the regional surroundings. I've discussed this at length, Kevin. with colleagues. Will we see people coming back into the cities? I don't know. In terms of Scotland and Edinburgh, I mean, similar. We are seeing a sort of similar trend. I don't have any economic data to support that to hand, but we can certainly come back on that. Do I think people will come back? So do we think that trend will reverse? I think that depends very much around our city strategy and what we do there. And I think, as I mentioned, one of the key things is I don't think we can expect the pandemic, the restrictions to end, and retail to open its doors and everything to go back to normal. I think business is going to have a massive part to play about the return to work agenda. Actually, I should say the return to the workplace agenda. Certainly at PwC, we've actually been quite vocal about our return to the workplace message, and we've been all within the sort of safe and COVID secure surroundings when appropriate, and when restrictions have softened, we've been very accepting of having people back into the workplace. And we recognise that's actually not just about supporting local businesses. Obviously, there's local businesses in Edinburgh and local businesses in Glasgow, Bristol, London that have a great dependency in PwC. We alone employ about 1,000 professionals in Scotland, 500 in Edinburgh, I think. So we have a responsibility about the return to the workplace, but there's also the mental health agenda that we have to consider. So business, I think, has got a real role to play here about what we do in terms of how and when and what format it would take in terms of attracting the workforce back into the city. And then obviously local authorities and local planners have a real key to play about what the future of that city looks like if we're going to, if it's the right thing to stem the flow of people out of the cities into the suburbs. So it's a really interesting agenda, Kevin. It's one that's really close to my heart because I have spent time in our local offices for various reasons on the odd day over the course of the pandemic, and nothing saddens me more to see the state of the cities, vibrant cities at the moment. It's something we're going to have to carefully address and plan now for, which I know we are, but a key agenda.
Good. Thank you, Stuart. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you. I just see John Ross got a hand up. John, do you want to come in?
Yeah, it's picking up on that theme and perhaps some observations. The predominant amount of our work is outside Scotland. And what we're finding through the work we're doing in London, Frankfurt, Paris, Oslo, the corporate clients, predominantly in financial services, have already made that move. Every one of our clients is now in a situation across Europe of actually downsizing their offices. They've invested in the technology already because they had to allow for remote working. But in talking to them, what they've actually found is productivity has gone up, operational costs are going down, and their view is that actually that decision's already been made. And I just wonder, it's great to hear what PwC are talking about, but are the privately owned companies actually going to make their forward decisions on the basis of, do we regenerate city centres? Or are they now looking at it? One client alone, based out of Frankfurt, is saving €2.5 million a year on expenses for management training and client meetings. And they're looking at that and saying that is money they can invest in other things. And as a second point, I'm actually based in rural Perthshire. The farmers around us are now converting old agricultural buildings into potential workspace for people who are now indicating they want to move out of the cities. So it's the observation rather than a question, but certainly we're finding across Europe, the move has already started, and they do not intend to put the same number of people into offices, and they're going to significantly downsize and change the environment from a working environment to a more collaborative workspace environment. So I was interested in anyone else's thoughts on that.
I can see a couple of hands coming up. Rather than bring you in, Stuart, just to bring somebody else in, if that's all right. Can we do Susan Deacon, then Matthew Hall? Is that okay? Susan, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Liz, and thanks, Stuart, for the presentation. And as I've had lots of food for thought, I want to throw just a couple of thoughts into the mix that may be slightly provocative, but just to maybe broaden out some of our thinking. First of all, the great phrase levelling up that, you know, has so caught on in the recent period. And I'm thinking particularly here about the approach that we have in Scotland. I mean, is there a question about when levelling up actually becomes levelling down? It's always been a challenge for us in Edinburgh to make the case for investing in success in order to maintain Edinburgh's position to drive the wider Scottish economy. And if you look, for example, at the Scottish Government's report to Benny Higgins' report, where there's, you know, very explicit emphasis on Glasgow and Clyde, Ayrshire and the North East. And across other aspects of policy, you can actually see an absence of attention to Edinburgh and some of the more, in inverted commas, successful cities in terms of recovery. And I think, you know, there's a concern there about how we get not just economic, but social activity rebooted, if you like. And that takes me on to my second thought and slight provocation. We talk rightly so much about young people and skills, and the longer that this situation goes on, the more we have become conscious of the impact that it's having on young people in particular. And I worry that we think too much about skills development just in terms of active interventions through FEHE in the workplace and so on. I mean, we've now got a generation of youngsters that are missing out on social interaction that develops them and enables them to be high functioning adults. And I think there's a connection here that we don't make, which is with our cities and our city centres. And that is that if we're all living in 15-minute neighbourhoods, which is one of the other fads at the moment, which many of us have been doing for the last year, then we're not getting the social interactions, the cultural interactions, and all the confidence and capabilities that goes with that. And for some of us at a certain age, that doesn't matter too much because we've kind of been there, done it and got the t-shirt. But you know, for young people that aren't getting those opportunities just now, their development is suffering. And I think there's a case to be made for the recovery of our city centres to create those environments where that social development is critical, particularly for young people. So just some thoughts there for you to respond to, maybe looking through a slightly different lens.
Thank you, Susan. And my, you know, I totally agree with that, with the 15-minute neighbourhoods, 20-minute neighbours. It was something I was going to raise, but I wanted to give everybody else a chance. You know, I do think it's one of those kind of the new thinking, new ideas that's a concept rather than a model, and we're in danger of kind of going down that rabbit hole and causing all kinds of problems. I think, you know, it's not an either or. I think it's fantastic that we have these vibrant neighbourhoods, but I think we need to be careful. I think it was Billy Connolly was on recently, Made in Scotland, when he talks about they moved everybody out of the slums in Glasgow and took them to Drumchapel where they all had baths. But there's only so many hours a day you can sit in a bath, but they didn't have the theatres and the galleries and the museums and, you know, all that facilities that create communities and develop people. That was missing, and that had a big impact. Sorry, I'm kind of hogging. Matthew, I'll bring you in now quickly, and I see Elyn's got a hand up as well, and then Stuart can come in and maybe sum up, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Liz. And you get the benefit of or the pleasure of two PwC partners here, not one. But one thing I was going to share, actually, just coming back in terms of the you know, John's point around you know, the potential for companies and organisations to move away from city centres, to move to remote working and different ways of operating. I guess an important factor here as well is what employees want as well in terms of attracting labour. And certainly what we've seen, we've recently surveyed all of our staff, so that's sort of 22,500 people in the UK. And there was a very clear message back that while people do want to work differently in the future, they still want to continue to work in offices. And generally in our people, they're sort of talking about 2 to 3 days a week was the sort of average that people would like to work in offices. And I do think that very strongly reflects, certainly we found one thing our people have missed is the social interaction, and just that need, you know, it's kind of a basic human need to see other people and interact with people. And so I think, as employers, we all need to think about that in terms of the ability to attract people in the future, and what you offer. That might also mean that actually we have to think around, how our workplaces and offices are set out and what they're offering people, and are they offering people that kind of collaboration. But personally, I do think, there is definitely a continued place for the office in the future, and actually I think it will become an increasingly important part of how we attract people into city centres as well. The last thing I was going to say, which was just picking up on this point around how do you regenerate city centres and what do they look like in the future. I think obviously one of the great assets Edinburgh has is all the arts and culture, and it was quite interesting in many ways that actually Edinburgh's been so resilient, because on the face of it you'd sit there and think, the impact of travel and tourism and the festival and Hogmanay and all those things you would expect to have a huge impact on the economy, and it's shown great resilience. But I do think when you look to that future and how you attract people back into the city centre, I think all those things around arts and culture that Edinburgh's had a great reputation for in the past probably need to be, kind of front and centre of how we regenerate the city in the future. So just a couple of thoughts, Des.
Thank you very much for that. Eileen, I know you had your hand up, but Paul McLennan would like, you're going to speak I'm going to hand over to you in a minute or so. Would you mind if I bring Paul in ahead of you, and then we can bring you in, if that's all right? Paul, really quickly, if you want to ask your question.
Thank you, Liz, and I'll probably go into what Eileen will be talking about as well. It's really just where PwC see the role of the city region deals. Obviously, with the structure that's in place, does it need a refresh, and what's its role going ahead in the next few years, and looking at the much wider agenda that the city region deal has?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and trying to keep it short, Paul, I think there is a need around the refresh on a lot of the thinking in the city region deals. We were talking about this other day, and there's kind of three kind of key components to that. I think there's a bit around data modeling and the overall strategy, and clearly, we're refreshing in all of those areas across a number of domains, but the ever more important need to have the access to the right data to support some of the future decisions that are being made, and then the economic and business modeling that's required to support some of the key decisions, and then the subsequent strategies. Yeah, that I think absolutely we've got to step back and have a look at those elements. So,
okay, thanks, Stuart.
Thanks. Eileen, do you want to come in now? Is it a contribution to this discussion you want to make?
Yeah, I suppose it's actually kind of a combination, and it probably flows quite neatly in here. I just wanted to highlight as well that thank you very much for the presentation. I think it's really interesting, and I must say that the first time I read the report, I was quite struck by the findings, because it's not at all what I'm seeing on the ground. Obviously, Edinburgh, I agree, we have a very resilient economy in the sense that it's very spread out, and we're not reliant on one sector. But I feel like it's not necessarily giving a fair reflection of the current discrepancies that we do have. We do have a very strong reliance on tourism and hospitality, and I think that it doesn't quite match up when you're seeing that we are one of the cities and one of the local authorities in the whole country with the greatest reliance on furlough scheme. That in itself, kind of, to me, is a contrast to saying that it's also very resilient. So I think that it's a case of almost needing to kind of delve a little bit deeper and understanding exactly what the numbers are saying and how it reflects in reality. And it kind of feeds in with the leveling up position as well, because in a way it's almost like the private sector, which is very strong in Edinburgh. We have some, obviously the financial sector has contributed massively to the economy, and we are extremely grateful for that as well. But it then kind of masks the issue of that we have people that are in low paid insecure jobs, and there is still inclusion is still very strong in Edinburgh. The need for inclusion is very strong in Edinburgh, and indeed as part of the council's new business plan that we've just agreed, that is one of our key focuses is eradicating poverty by 2030. I mean, it's an extremely optimistic but it's a bit of a, you know, go big or go home, and I suppose that is our aim. So I suppose it's just important for me to highlight that the report, although is very positive in one way, it also worries me, because it makes me concerned that there are people sitting in, for example, Westminster, that only see the top level figures and thinking, well, Edinburgh don't need any support, when in fact we absolutely do, and we still have a lot of people that are in a pretty dire situation as a result of COVID. So I'm not, sorry, that feels like I'm putting a very dulling impact on this. It's not my intention as such, but I just wanted to make sure that we don't forget about those people that have been seriously impacted as well.
Ellen, just one quick comeback on that. I think you're absolutely right to point that out. And conversely, I've had conversations with Liverpool and cities that have at the other end of the scale, and the headline data doesn't tell the full story. It really doesn't. So I completely agree. There is one thing I would like to do. I can maybe speak to one of the comms team. There is a greater level of detail that sits specific to Scotland. So it'd be great. I can happily share that, Ellen, and then then the ability to sort of delve down into each of the various sort of economic and well-being measurements, and then you can actually start to understand some of the sort of underlying challenges that exist. But I think it's a really important point to make.
Thanks very much, Stuart.
Thank you very much, Stuart. We are running out of time, but very keen to hear from Elin. So thank you very much for that, Stuart. I think there's some good comments coming through. Really, really interesting. And thank you very much for joining us this morning. Elin, I'll just hand over to you. For those of you who might know Elin, she is Senior Manager for Business Growth and Inclusion at City of Edinburgh Council. Joined last February, so what a time to take on a new job. And then she has the added responsibility of ensuring the distribution of all the grants and support to businesses. So I think it was baptism by fire in the extreme, Elin. So welcome, and if you could give us a quick overview of what's going on in the city.
Absolutely, thank you very much. And to be honest, I think we've covered a lot of what I was going to say already. So I suppose the key things that I wanted to pick out, Liz had asked me to talk a little bit about mainly the second wave and obviously the impact of kind of the second lockdown. I draw the second wave a little bit further back. So from kind of October, when we saw the introduction of the break restrictions that then turned into the strategic framework that then turned into a new national lockdown in December. And I asked our team to just say, well, actually, what have we seen as a result of that? We've obviously seen a lot of impact on the ground, but what are the stats telling us? I know, Liz, you like your stats, so I thought I would give you a few numbers, and I know that you've already covered a few, but obviously since October there was a huge reduction in visitors to Edinburgh, and it comes back to the reliance that we do have on tourism and hospitality. We saw airport passengers down 3 million on 2019 numbers, hotel rooms used for about 1 million less, and I think that in generally the visitors to the city centre were about half of what we experienced a year earlier. So it's been a huge impact overall. As I mentioned earlier, there are many more jobs in Edinburgh that are supported by the furlough scheme, and the number of jobs furloughed in Edinburgh increased by 52% from September to January. So it's a large number of people that are currently using that scheme. We also have a number of business grants that we've been providing. So as Liz was saying, that's been a bit of a challenge for us in the council. I'm very thankful to my colleagues in the transactions team, in the sort of customer non-domestic rates team, that have taken the main brunt of it. But we've been distributing support of over £128 million to over 19,000 businesses in Edinburgh, through the strategic framework, through the number of different new grants that have been provided as part of the Scottish Government initiative to support businesses. City of Edinburgh Council have also been distributing discretionary grants. Again, thanks to the Scottish Government, who have been recognising that there are businesses that are still not meeting all the criteria for those grants. And we have been trying to put the criteria to support as many businesses as possible. We've had support from Chamber of Commerce and other partners in forming them. And we are now looking to hopefully get some extra funding towards that so we can help even more businesses. Our main aim is to support as many as possible through this lockdown, through the hopefully last few weeks and months, and then support a recovery for us all. As I said earlier, the council business plan is one that focuses on sustainability and inclusion. As I said, one of our large goals is to end poverty, but we're also aiming to be a net zero city by 2030. So it is definitely, there's some very, very big goals, very ambitious, but it is we do feel like we need to set the standard high and try and meet that. So we are looking for private sector partners to help us and join us. We're working with Chamber of Commerce on the sustainability agenda, especially, and helping businesses to develop their business models to become more sustainable and to help us reach those goals. I think the last point I just wanted to touch on very briefly as well was the bit about returning to work, and we've been doing a big survey around what employers and employees are wanting to do, and I think I can't remember who was saying that earlier, but around most employees wanting to work that kind of mix, working from home and working in the office. It's absolutely in line with what we're seeing as well. And what we are seeing is also a huge appetite from employers to support that. They are keen to try and find that work-life balance for their staff. However, we are also seeing that many employers are struggling with the actual being able to implement that. I'm sure that you've all been in the situation where you've been the one person that's calling in from a video conference and everyone else is sitting in a conference room. It's very awkward. It's actually easier when everyone is on a Zoom call like this. And we understand that a lot of businesses would actually need help with how do they get the technology to actually support a mix of people working from home and in the office. So I think that's going to have to be some of our focus as well over the coming months. Is basically supporting those businesses that actually want to provide that work-life balance for their staff. I'm sorry, I feel like I've just been rambling on a little bit here, and I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to hand back over to you, Liz. But I'm happy to take any questions or emails if you want.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you very much, Elin. I know that there's been an awful lot to cover over the last 12 months. Paula Wood from Visit Scotland had wanted to come in, but I think you said that Elin's covered a lot of those things. Paula, is there anything you want to add very quickly?
No, I guess it's just the report gives a really good starting point for us to look at what do we need to do within the context of Edinburgh, because every city is different and every city is starting recovery from a different starting point. I was worried about the comment that was made that Edinburgh is showing a greater sign of resilience than other cities in the UK. We certainly don't believe that to be the case at both a Visit Scotland level, but I sit within a couple of other working groups, and I was with Chris Brodie from Skills Development Scotland this week, and he made the point that furlough currently right now is acting as a dam. It's holding back the flow of what will be quite cataclysmic pain if we don't see a bounce back. Last year in 2021, there was an observation that the sector, the visitor economy, had bounced back quite robustly when the lockdown restrictions were lifted during the summer. That wasn't the case for cities. The cities operated entirely differently from the rural areas. So we did see really healthy demand. We did see an uplift for the rural areas, and some of those businesses, about 13%, were able to perform actually even better than they had in 2019. In the cities, we didn't have any shift on the dial in terms of demand for occupancy. We had lost all of our festival opportunity. We had lost all of our business events and tourism all of our sporting events. So these large scale public events and cultural events absolutely drive both our city's reputation, but more importantly, they drive our economy. And the business events sector is essential to the overall ability for Scotland, to the brand, to position itself on the international stage for export and innovation in new companies. So those business events directly link to our academia sector. They are places for the dispersal of information, for us to show our own prowess in that space, and basically to do new deals for new technology to be coming out of our universities, out of our robotics centres, out of our medical establishments. So I think I would be really interested to know from Stuart and Matthew whether or not there's going to be a bigger, more detailed forecasting and modelling piece of work that will be done on the cities based on the visitor economy at large, or are you seeing that the visitor economy is one element of the overall makeup for the cities as part of the Good Growth report?
Thanks very much, Paula. You've actually done a brilliant job in what I was going to say in my kind of closing remarks. So that saved me the job of doing that. So that saved us a couple of minutes. Stuart, can I just ask you for a one sentence response to Paula's final question? Are you going to do more detailed analysis of the visitor sector?
At the moment, there's nothing that I'm aware of, Liz, but it's not to say that it won't be happening within the economics team. I mean, I think it's a point well made. Sometimes the language around resilience and Edinburgh being top of the table sort of masks some of the underlying challenges that we have. So again, perhaps in terms of the messaging, we need to be careful about how we position that, because it certainly the underlying economic data is still not good. So I think we do have to be, it's a point taken on that one. What I can do, Liz, I can connect with details and come back on that one if there's going to be any underlying data that might support Visit Scotland specific to that agenda, and we can maybe pick up offline if that would be helpful.
Yeah, brilliant. You just pass to us, and we can make sure it gets sent on. Thank you very much. Really poor chairing from me. We're 4 minutes over time, but I think it was really worthwhile hanging in there and getting a few extra comments and questions. Really brilliant session. Thank you very much, Stuart. Thank you, Elin, and also thank you, Paula, for doing my summing up. That was brilliant. Have a great day, everybody, and hope to see you very soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.